Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're happy to have with us today Reverend Mike Moran from the Spiritual Living Center, a friend, someone well known in the Sacramento faith community, and we're very happy to have you. Thank you.
It's good to be here, John. Thanks for asking me.
Let's sort of let everybody know how and where you got to where you are. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in McKinney, Texas, just a little northwest of Dallas, a little tiny town. My father was the personnel manager at a VA hospital there. It was an old prisoner of war camp during World War II, so that's where I grew up. It was like a little community inside of a small town in Texas, and it was a great place to grow up. But we moved around a lot. I lived in McKinney, then we moved to Chicago, then we moved to Dallas, then we moved back to McKinney, and then we wound up in Spokane, Washington when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and that's where I really consider my home.
And you graduated from high school in Spokane?
I graduated high school in Spokane. Shortly after we arrived in Spokane, my father had a heart condition, and he died. So I was about 12 years old. I just turned 12 years old. So we were kind of trapped up in Spokane. All of our family were either Chicago or down in the south. So we were this little pocket of Morans up in Spokane. And I grew to love that area.
And you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister. My sister Patty lives in Beaverton, Oregon, right outside of Portland.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now, how did you end up in Northern California?
Well, it's an interesting story. My first career right out of college was in broadcasting. I was a broadcast major, and so I accepted a job in Seattle. My first real job was a rock and roll disc jockey. I was a morning man at an oldies but goodies station in about 1970, and did that for many, many years and had a ball. I really enjoyed doing it. And it was an exciting time to be, in radio during the Vietnam War, all of the upheaval that was taking place, and great music.
And you've done plenty of radio and some television and voiceovers and all of those sorts of things.
Right. That was my first career, and I loved every moment of it. There's only two things I ever wanted to do in my life. One was to be a minister, and then to be a broadcaster, and I've been able to do them both.
Did you know you had a pretty good sounding voice by the time you were 15 or 16 years old? Or?
Well, I didn't, but my father, all of the Moran men had these resonant, booming voices. And it wasn't until after my dad died that I found out that his dream, he was a hospital administrator, drove a tank in World War II, then went into hospital VA work for the Veterans Administration. But it was later on that I learned that his dream was to be a broadcaster. So I kind of followed in his footsteps, not knowing that was his all-time dream.
I did some sports radio in Sacramento in the early 1970s for about 6 months. Got a job transfer and moved out. And at the time, I thought that's what I would do for sure.
Sure.
I didn't, but that was fun, and it was exciting times and a lot of action. And
well, it was a very different market back then as well, because at that time it was locally owned radio and television stations. All of the staff were local people that lived in that community. There was very little simulcasting, so it was this kind of close-knit, competitive community, and we all had a ball, and it was all about creativity. Now it's pretty well programmed. There's not a lot of creativity in that media anymore.
Backing up for a minute, did you ever have a Texas drawl?
I did have a Texas drawl, and when we moved to Spokane, I remember the day that we were there. It must have been about 1957, I suppose. We moved in there, and our moving van had pulled up, and all of the kids in the neighborhood are out there on their bikes looking at the new family moving in, and you know how you feel awkward. And my mother said, we'll get his bike off. It says, get your bike and ride over there and introduce yourself to those kids. And I was very shy, but I did. I rode up close, and they came up and said hello to me. And the first thing out of my mouth was, "Hi, y'all." And I think
said, okay.
that's the last time I thought I've got to lose this accent, because they gave me a hard time.
Is your mother still living?
No, my mother died. My father died in 1960, and my mother died in 1977. So they both died way too young.
And do you believe in life after death?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. I've been with many, many people at the moment of their death. And I've been with both of my parents at the moment of their death. I've been with my wife when she passed, and I don't have any doubt.
My father died when I was 7, and if I hadn't believed that I would see him again and be with him again and know him again, I wouldn't have been able to face life quite so optimistically. I just always believed, well, I've got to kind of live out my life, and then I'll see him again. My mother lived 40 years past that within a month or so, just the 40 years, and then she died, and that was that.
Yeah.
When did you marry? How did you meet your wife? How did life start for you as a married man?
As a married man, I actually was married right out of 1969. I married my college sweetheart, and you know, we produced a beautiful, my daughter, who's now 40, and she's a nurse in Spokane. That marriage lasted for about 9 years, and then we just started growing in different directions, spiritually and in many different ways. And she's a wonderful woman. I greatly admire her, but we were not meant to be together. So then I was single for quite a while until I met my wife, Faith, in church at Unity of Bellevue in Bellevue, Washington, right outside of Seattle. And I remember seeing her and knowing instantly that this was the woman that I was going to spend the rest of my life with. I just knew it, and that's what happened.
Do you have grandchildren?
I have 5 grandchildren. Well, actually, I have 4. 1 on the way. 2 up in Spokane. My 2 grandsons, Mitch and Austin. And then here in Sacramento, I just spent yesterday with them. My little granddaughter, Sophia Faith. She's 3 years old. I'd pull out pictures and show you. and then my youngest grandson is Liam, and he is 9 months old. And then my oldest son, Darren, he married a woman from the Ukraine, and she just found out she's pregnant, and they're having a little girl coming up here pretty soon.
Well,
so I'll have 5.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
No one ever warned me, Mike, in advance how much I would love, just personally, how much I would love our children's children.
Oh, I know.
It's just overpowering.
It made my children worthwhile, all those tough years, you know.
that you battle through.
Yeah, you battle through.
Well, when you met your wife, Faith, were you ministering at the time?
No, actually, we were both working at a church. I was what they called a platform assistant. I led prayers and scripture readings, and she was the head of the Sunday school. And I remember the weekend I had my little girl, Jen, I took Jenny to Sunday school to introduce her, and she was very shy. And there was this wonderful, beautiful woman there with like a salt and pepper afro haircut, kind of modified. And she was just full of life and full of energy, and she welcomed my daughter so beautifully. I was a little nervous because I didn't grow up in a church that had Sunday school. And she could see my daughter was nervous, and she got down and she said, "Do you like to color?" And Jenny said, she shook her head. She didn't even talk to her. She goes, "Well, you're going to be my assistant all day. I need somebody to help me color."
How cool is
my
that?
daughter left my leg, latched onto her, and I thought, wow. And so I, just watched that relationship grow, and a few years later we were married. And then we went into ministry. That's when we started planning ministry. I remember we were dating, and we went on a picnic, and we were at Glacier Creek up on the Canadian border. And it was that kind of getting to know you phase, and I said, if you could do anything, what would you do? What would you do with your life? And she hesitated a moment, and she said, I want to be a Unity minister. And I said, so do I.
Did that surprise you that she said that?
It did. It did. I mean, it delighted me more than anything. Because I had never uttered those words. It seemed so far-fetched. I mean, here I was at one time a rock and roll disc jockey. Now I was in news radio, but still, it seemed so far out of the realm of possibility. But we started talking about it and saying, if we could create a church community, what would that look like? And so we started talking about what was important to us. And for both of us, growing up, she was born in Dallas, Texas, I found out. Both of us, because we grew up in a segregated South, in a very Protestant area. We were one of the few Catholic families in McKinney, Texas, and there were parents that wouldn't let their children play with us because we were Catholic. So that was the first time I'd been kind of singled out. And then, you know, my religion is saying everybody else is wrong. Their religion is saying they know we're wrong. And then there was all of this segregation. And as a child, for both of us, that had a tremendous impact, to the point where when we finally, it was a formative factor. Later on, we said, if you could create a community, a spiritual community, what would it look like? And for both of us, inclusivity was so important. It was vital. A place where people of all different faiths could come together, races, cultures, if that was possible. And now this is back in the early 80s, so there was nothing like that. But fast forward 25, 30 years, and that's exactly what we created. We saw it there, and then 30 years, 30 years, it was 15 years later it manifested.
Do you feel like you were raised in a religious home?
Yes, religion was a very important part of my growing up as a Catholic, and I have a wonderful education through the school system. I really learned to appreciate the sacred when I was a child.
That's nicely said.
Yeah, and as I grew, there were some parts of the theology that I really disagreed with. But, I gleaned from that an appreciation for the mystery that is life and that is God, for the sacredness in all creation, for meaningful ritual and prayer and meditation. Those things I really were put in me as a child. And as a teen, I really backed away from that and acted out. But, that called me back later on. I had that foundation. I think it's very important for children to have that.
A man who is long dead, but a man I greatly admired when I was a young adult, said to me one day, if you will plant in your children the things that are right and good and decent and honorable while they're young, and encourage it and live it and teach it, they might grow up into teenagerhood and take off and go in all directions, but they will always come back. And he said, if you don't plant it and put it in them, they might take off and never come back.
That's right.
And I've watched with great interest, where children were taught to pray and a belief in God, and where love was spoken there in the home, and there was respect and all those other things. They may go out and act out a little bit in that, but they always pull back.
Well, then that's exactly what happened to me, because when my dad died, I was about 2 years later, when I hit about 13, 14 years old, I was so angry. There was just this anger in me. I felt abandoned because we were up in Spokane, Washington. He died through no fault of his own, but I felt abandoned, and I just waged war on the world. And I think I went from like this little altar boy to Rosemary's Baby overnight. My poor mother. And I got in and out of trouble, kicked out of school, in and out of jail for all this just nonsense fighting. And it was 16 years old, and I was in jail, and I had a vision in that jail cell, because I remember I looked around, I thought, I did this. Nobody did this to me. Every decision I've made has brought me to this. And I was looking around this jail. I thought, this is my future. This is my future. And that night I really prayed. I prayed. But I was angry. All that. I was just this mixture of emotions. Everything was like in a blender that night. But it was that night that I got a very clear vision of myself as a broadcaster. It was like a dream or a vision. I don't know what you want to call it. But I was on the air, but I wasn't just playing records. I was a voice for the voiceless in this vision.
That's a nice way to state that.
Yeah, because that's what I felt like at the time. I didn't have a voice. So all of a sudden in my dream or visioning, what was revealed to me was I could be a voice for the voiceless. And that image defined almost every move I made from the day I was released from that jail cell. And my mother, she really threw me she came in, when she walked in, she had the saddest look I've ever seen on a woman's face. And I thought, oh, I don't ever want to see that look on her face again because of something I've done. And she looked at me and she said, and I was raging, and she goes, I don't know who you're pretending to be, but I know who you really are, and you're not this person. And I would rage back at her, and she would just say, I don't know who you're pretending to be, but I know who you are. And then she would remind me, she said, you're that kid that brought home every wounded animal. You're the kid that stuck up for all the kids who were getting, you were the kid that did this, and you were the kid that did that. And she reminded me of who I was, and because I'd totally forgotten. And when she left, and then when she left that jail cell, she turned around. She didn't bail me out, by the way. She left me there for 3 days. She always held my feet to the fire.
A wise mother.
It was, boy, that was tough love. And she turned around and she said, and I want you to know one more thing. There's nothing you can ever say or do that will make me stop loving you. And then she left me there for 2 more days, you know, so.
You know, I said to my mother when Dad had been dead about 20 years, I want to talk about the anger and stuff that I have felt inside, that going places and being the only child there without a dad and all those other things. And she put her hand up and she said, you know what? You're going to have to talk to somebody else. I've got my own issues I've been dealing with. And there's 7 children, you know, and she just sort of took that. You know, and she said, I'm sorry that's been painful for you, but, you know, drive on, boys.
Yeah, that's right.
That was sort of thing. So we both have angel mothers, sounds like.
It sounds like it, yeah.
So when did you start actually a church and ministering and doing the things that you wanted to do?
Well, Faith and I, we married, I was still in broadcasting, and I was in Spokane at that time, and we woke up one day, and I said, Faith, I think it's, or I think she said, I think it's time for us to apply for ministerial school. And we had a great life. And I thought, oh man, you know, I don't want to go back to school at 30-some years old. But I said, well, we'll just take one step. I'll make application. So I made application, and I was accepted. And so we packed up everything and left this wonderful, easy life behind, and went to 3 years of ministerial school at Unity Village in Missouri, at Unity Institute, as resident seminarians, and loved it. But we were like being back in college again. You know, we're in this little tiny duplex, had enough money, we thought, to carry us through, but then real estate did a turnaround, and we lost everything. And here we are stuck in ministerial school with no money. We went from, you know, a fairly decent lifestyle to now we are like poor students. And we realized, I said, well, let's just go back to Spokane. I'll get another broadcast gig. We'll be back on our feet. And she went down and looked at the finances, and I heard her laugh, and she said, Michael, we had a young son with us. She goes, we don't have enough money to get one of us back on the bus. We're stuck here. And I remember that's when we said, well, you know what? Either this works or it doesn't. Either this is true or it's not true. And this is the time to find out, because we've got nothing left to rely on right now except faith in God to see us through this. And that turned out to be the best lesson we ever had in our 3 years of seminary. You know, that we learned to survive, and not just survive, but thrive. We left there, went to Tacoma, Washington, spent 5 years in ministry, came to Sacramento in the mid-90s for a couple of years, then went to Unity Village as retreat directors, international retreat directors. And then we started Spiritual Life Center in 1998. And it has been, it's been a dream come true. I always feel like I'm living right in the middle of my dream. That dream we had up on Glacier Creek on the Canadian border, Washington-Canadian border.
You've had a nice run.
I've had a nice run.
Those years where you had to walk by faith, did you find that it made your marriage stronger and greater, and you pray together and cry together and laugh together? And
It was, and I'm so fortunate. I don't think I could have done it without faith. I married well. As they say, I married above myself. You know,
I understand the concept.
And you know, I was looking for faith all my life, and I didn't realize it would come in such a beautiful package like that. But she really was the kind of the heart and soul of the ministry. And serving with her, I mean, you know, when you're 24/7 with somebody, that doesn't work well for many people. It worked very well for us. And so when she became ill, that's when my faith was really tested. When she started showing signs of some kind of a neurological condition and it turned out to be a very rare, untreatable, incurable condition. And it was, just excruciatingly slow and painful. But it was one of the greatest walks of faith, journey of faith that I've ever been on. And it was a real privilege and terrible at the same time. But people would often ask me, they said, boy, that must have challenged everything that you ever believed in. I said, it did. I said, as I was going through this, watching somebody you love, adore, die a millimeter a day, I said, every sermon I've ever given, every counseling session I ever had, everything I ever believed about myself, about God, about good, about evil, all, I hit the wall, and I had to face it all. But at the end of it, at the end of that, my faith was deeper, my belief in God greater, less conceptualized, but much more real.
Now, in the spirit of what you've just said, at her passing, did you have those feelings of both she's out of pain, relief, but also that sort of, oh dear, what am I going to do now, and the sorrows and all those things?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there was the relief, because I do believe, and I know Faith believed, in the ongoing of life. I don't know, exactly what that is, but I really trust that. And she did as well. So, in that respect, I was happy that she was released from that suffering. And it was such a beautiful experience, because we are interfaith. We accept and believe and support the many faith traditions. It would have been her dream come true, because one night, as she's on her deathbed, there is 2 Muslim imams there. There is a rabbi, there is a Catholic priest, there's a Hindu nun, and a unity minister, all standing around her bed. And one with a Quran, one with a Torah, and the nuns with their beads, and she had a Muslim blanket on her, and this. And I thought, this is her dream. This is exactly the way she would have wanted to go out. So there was that beauty of seeing her dream come true at the very end, where all of the faiths come together, in support of one another, of their sister here. And then, of course, as the husband and best friend, there's just that terrible emptiness that you feel that is unlike any, there are no words for it.
Do you get over that, at least spiritually, based on what you believe and know and understand?
Well, I think you deal with it. I'm not sure you ever get over it,
right.
But you keep moving forward, because you do have a belief. And, faith was not her body. Faith was this incredible spirit that just inhabited that body for a period of time. That faith is still around. I miss her body. I miss her presence greatly. It'll be 4 years in January, but I know she's just fine.
Will you remarry?
I don't know. I don't think so. At least not right now.
Sure.
I never say never, but it's hard for me to imagine. I'm just fortunate that I had what I had, because I don't think many people have had a relationship that was that intimate, creative, challenging, and fun, all at the same time. I always wondered if that kind of relationship was possible. Now I know it is.
Now, we talked before we came on the air about you would retire sometime in the next year or two.
Right.
What will you do when you're not actively at the pulpit with Spiritual Life Center?
Well, I want to support the new minister that comes in and joins the team. I want to support the mission of Spiritual Life Center, because I believe in it so deeply. I want to complete 3 books that I've started, but just can't seem to find the time with a large, active, dynamic ministry. One of them is called The Journey of Faith, which is a spiritual guide for caregivers that came out of my own experience of how people say, how did you deal with that? And I said, it was the day that I realized this was my spiritual practice. When I turned her journey into my spiritual practice, it made all the difference in the world. So I want to record some of that. I have journals. And another book is called Advice I Wish Had Been Given by the Father I Never Had.
Oh, cool.
because my dad died when I was so young, and I used to make up this ideal father in my head, and attribute quotes that I would hear. Well, that's great advice, and as a little kid, I'd make up the fact that my dad said that. It was Winston Churchill or somebody.
Not too long ago, in the last several years, a friend of mine said for Christmas he was going to give his grandchildren 40 or 50 pages just typed out that would say, answers to the questions my grandchildren might ask me. And he did that. I didn't see it, but I got to thinking about it. My wife and I were talking and said, now if we were to do that, what would the questions be? And it's not quite as easy. I mean, but eventually you get to what was the first car you ever owned, and when was your first date, and blah, blah, blah. But what would you like your grandchildren to know about you?
Oh boy, what would I like them to know about me? I just did a memorial service for a woman that I thought a lot about what people said. There were two themes that came up. Beautiful woman, and she left 2 daughters behind, and her husband, and a lot of friends. And what kept coming up with people would say, I wanted to be like her. She made me want to be a better mother. She made me want to be a better friend. Nice. She made me want to be a better everything. And then they would say, and I always left feeling better about myself when I was in her presence. That she was a kind person. And if I could be remembered as kind and caring and attentive to people, genuine, that's what I would want them to know about. That's how I'd like to be remembered.
Well, if you keep doing what you've been doing, that will be a slam dunk. Last question as we come to an end. If you could wave a magic wand and fix something in society, what would that be?
I would, it would find a way to bring the different faith traditions together, not into one tradition, because I believe that I love them all, but where they could come together in a place of respect and cooperation. Instead of trying to make each other wrong, that they would find a way to acknowledge the differences, acknowledge the similarities, and then work together to make this a better world. Because I think if it doesn't happen there, peace doesn't have a chance on earth. It has to happen in our churches, in our temples, in our mosques, and in our synagogues first.
I'm with you, brother.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Thanks, John.
Way to go. Thanks so much for being here. It's
Thank
a delight to visit with you. And I wish you well in the near future and beyond.
Well, keep up the God work.
Thank you.